Graham smirked. Sloan, we're downsizing. Clear your desk by tomorrow. I nodded. Of course, he didn't know I already had an offer from his biggest rival. By Monday, his smile vanished as he walked into a meeting and saw me sitting at the head of the table. Sloan, we're downsized. Clear your desk by tomorrow. Silence. The words lingered in the air, heavier than the polished mahogany desk between us. I kept my face unreadable, even though my heart pounded in my chest. I had spent 6 years of my life saving this company, turning Graham Delacroix's failures into successes, fighting his battles, fixing his messes. Now he was tossing me aside like I was nothing. Not every battle is fought with fists, some are won with strategy, patience, and knowing when to make your move. You love stories of resilience, ambition, and power shifts. Make sure to subscribe. Together, we explore the moments that define us. Now let's dive in. Graham's fingers tapped rhythmically against his luxury watch, his expression eerily calm, as if this was just another routine decision, as if I wasn't the reason Delacroix Global Strategies was standing today. I swallowed the bitter taste of betrayal. You're downsizing. My voice came out steady, controlled. He nodded, completely unbothered. It's a tough market, Sloan. You know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. I had been in the trenches when this company was barely keeping its head above water. I had spent countless nights strategizing, negotiating, pulling Delacroix Global out of the red. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. Yet I was the one being cut. My stomach twisted, but I refused to let him see it. I squared my shoulders and my position. Graham sighed, leaning back in his chair. His smirk returned. That smirk, the one he always wore when he thought he was in control. I'm replacing you with Avery Sinclair. The name hit me like a slap. Avery. His girlfriend. I should have known. The signs were all there. The longer lunch breaks. The unnecessary meetings. The way he started deferring my decisions to someone with no experience in corporate strategy. Avery had never earned this position, but she had the one thing I didn't. Graham's attention. I stood up slowly, adjusting my blazer. Controlled. Calm. Graham was waiting for me to argue, to beg. But I smiled. For the first time in his pathetic life, Graham looked confused. No hard feelings, he asked, feigning concern. No hard feeling after everything I had sacrificed for this place, after turning this company from a failing disaster into a market leader. I wanted to laugh, scream, throw the expensive paperweight on his desk through the glass walls. But I wouldn't, because Graham didn't deserve my anger. He deserved something much worse. I turned, walking out of his office. My heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. As I moved through the hallways of Delacroix Global, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had made for this place. The late nights, the weekends lost, the relationships I let slip away. I had built teams from scratch, brokered record-breaking deals, saved this company when it was drowning. This was my reward, a quiet, humiliating exit. As I passed the glass-walled conference rooms, employees cast quick, uncertain glances at me. Some looked down at their desks. Others gave me sympathetic nods. They had heard. They knew, but none of them spoke up, because this was Graham Delacroix's empire, and I had just been erased. I reached my office, the space I had practically lived in for years. Everything was still in place. The files I had painstakingly organized, the business plans I had mapped out, the whiteboard filled with strategies that had saved this company. I moved toward my desk. Then I saw an email notification on my screen. The subject line, leadership announcement, new CSO appointment. My breath stilled. They didn't even wait. I clicked it open, scanning the text. My eyes burned with rage. Effective immediately, Avery Sinclair has been appointed as Chief Strategy Officer. We are confident that her vision and leadership will continue to drive Delacroix Global Strategies forward. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. Avery had never led anything in her life. She had never made a tough business decision, never built a strategy, never fought for a company's survival. But none of that mattered. Because Graham didn't value competence, he valued control. And I had never been controllable. A soft knock on the door made me look up. Miles Kessler, the head of finance, one of the few people at Delacroix Global Strategies I actually respected, stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "This company won't survive without you," he said, his voice low. I forced a small, bitter smile. "I know," he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You built this place, Sloan. You think Graham doesn't know he's making a mistake?" I shook my head. "Graham knows exactly what he's doing. He doesn't care about what's best for the company. He cares about control." Tried to talk to him," Miles continued. "Tried to make him see reason." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "And how did that go?" Miles's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's going to regret this." I nodded. But I already knew. The downfall had already begun. I turned back to my desk. The gold nameplate still read, "Sloan Mitchell, Chief Strategy Officer." Tomorrow, it would say Avery Sinclair, Julian's plaything. My jaw clenched. I inhaled sharply. This wouldn't be my ending. This wouldn't be my story. I had been the backbone of this company, the one who held it together, who fixed its failures, who made it a market leader. Graham thought I was replaceable. He was about to learn just how wrong he was, because without me, Delacroix Global would burn, and I wouldn't have to lift a finger to watch it happen. I stepped out of the Delacroix building. The cold night air hit my face like a slap. I should have felt something: anger, sadness, relief, anything. But all I felt was a hollow space inside my chest, one I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, tightening my grip around the small box that held the last remnants of my career. 6 years of my life, reduced to a few office supplies and a framed certificate. How poetic. The streets were unusually quiet. City lights flickered against the dark sky like embers of a dying fire. I needed a destination, somewhere to sit, to process, to think. But where? Not home. That would make it feel too real. Not a friend's place. I wasn't ready for sympathy. Then, as if on instinct, my feet started moving, carrying me down the figular sidewalks of downtown Manhattan. I hadn't been walking more than 5 minutes when a voice called out from behind me, "Sloan." I froze, jaw tightening before I even turned around. Of course it had to be her. I turned slowly, masking the storm brewing inside me, only to find her standing there in a form-fitting trench coat, her perfectly styled hair swaying gently in the breeze. She looked completely at ease, like a queen stepping out of her castle. While I stood there, holding a box full of my career's ashes, her lips curled into a practiced, innocent smile. "I just wanted to check in on you." I arched a brow, keeping my voice calm. "Check in? Yes?" she said sweetly, stepping closer. "I know how much this job meant to you." I nearly laughed. The audacity. She knew exactly what she was doing. I met her gaze, keeping my expression unreadable. "That's kind of you, Avery." She tilted her head. "No hard feelings, right? No hard feelings." I had rebuilt this company from the ground up, sacrificed my personal life, fought battles that weren't mine to fight, only to be discarded for her, for someone who had never earned a thing in her life. I smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "Of course not." Avery studied me for a second, searching for cracks in my composure. When she found none, her eyes glinted with amusement. She thrived on the power shift. She wanted me to break. Too bad for her. I had already broken once. It wasn't happening again. "Good," she said, giving a small nod. "Then I guess I'll see you around." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away, my heart pounding with barely contained fury. Let her have this moment. Soon I would have mine. I found myself walking toward a small bookstore cafe, tucked into a quiet street corner. It was one of my favorite places, somewhere I used to escape to, back when Delacroix Global still felt like a second home, not the battlefield it had become. The bell chimed softly as I stepped inside. The scent of brewed coffee and aged paper wrapped around me like a familiar embrace. A few late-night customers sat tucked in corners, absorbed in their books. The world felt slower here, distant from the chaos I had just left behind. I walked to the counter and ordered a black coffee, something strong enough to pull me out of my thoughts. As I waited, I noticed an old man sitting by the window, hunched over a newspaper, his hands shook slightly. His glasses were perched at the edge of his nose as he underlined something with a pen. I don't know why, but he felt familiar. When the barista handed me my coffee, I found myself moving toward his table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "Do you mind if I sit here?" The man looked up. His eyes were sharp but kind. After a brief hesitation, he nodded. I sat down across from him, wrapping my fingers around the warmth of my cup. "You look troubled," he said after a moment. I exhaled, letting out a short, humorless chuckle. "It's been a long day." He gave a knowing nod, then slid the newspaper across the table. "Ever read the business section?" I glanced down. The headlines were about corporate takeovers, rising stocks, and C-suite scandals. A world I had once thrived in. A world that had just spit me out. "I used to," I admitted. "Now I'm not so sure." The man studied me for a moment, before setting his pen down. "You remind me of my daughter. She worked herself to the bone for a company that never saw her worth." I looked up. Something heavy settled in my chest. "What happened to her?" I asked. A small, sad smile touched his lip. "She walked away, started something of her own." I swallowed, my fingers tightening around my cup. "Walked away." The words echoed in my mind, settling into corners I hadn't dared to examine yet. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't need to keep fighting to prove my worth to people who never valued me in the first place. Maybe it was time to build something of my own. I left the cafe feeling lighter, though the weight of betrayal still clung to me like a second skin. As I walked back toward my apartment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and hesitated. A message from Miles. Miles Kessler. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here. You didn't deserve this." I stared at the message for a long moment. Miles had always been one of the few good ones. He had seen what was coming. He had warned Graham, and Graham had ignored him. I typed out a response. "Me. Thanks, Miles. I'll be okay." I wasn't sure if that was true, but I would be. Eventually, as I slid my phone back into my pocket, I turned one last time toward the city skyline. Delacroix Global Strategies stood tall in the distance, a monument to everything I had built. But it wasn't mine anymore. Maybe that was a good thing. I stood at the edge of my apartment balcony, staring at the skyline. DGS loomed in the distance, its glass windows reflecting the city lights like a fortress against the dark. It had been 3 days since I walked out of that building, and yet it still felt like a phantom limb. Something I could feel even though it was no longer mine. I should have been grieved. Instead, I was waiting for the first crack to appear. Because if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was that Delacroix Global wouldn't survive without me. Graham thought he made a business decision when he replaced me with Avery. He had, in reality, made a mistake that was about to cost him everything. A vibration from my phone pulled me from my thoughts. I reached for it, expecting a message from Miles. But it wasn't from him. "Unknown. You're not the only one leaving." My pulse quickened. I typed back quickly. "Who is this?" The response came almost instantly. "Unknown. Someone who believes in you." Before I could reply, another message appeared. "Unknown. Check your email." I hesitated, but curiosity pushed me forward. I opened my laptop and logged into my inbox. It was flooded with Delacroix Global internal resignation emails. My breath hitched. It wasn't one or two people. It was dozens. Finance, marketing, operations, even a few from legal. Half the people I had worked alongside for years were leaving. And suddenly I knew. Graham thought he was getting rid of me. Instead, he had set off a mass exodus. I refreshed the screen. More resignation notices. They weren't just employees, they were top executives. The minds behind DGS's success. The same people Graham had ignored. The same people he had undervalued. They weren't just leaving. They were walking straight to me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. I hesitated half a second before answering. "Who is this?" A deep voice responded. "Julian Cross. I hear you've been busy." My fingers tightened around my phone. Argentum Holdings. Graham's biggest competitor. The same man who had tried to hire me months ago. "You wanted to talk," I said. "How did you get my number?" Julian chuckled. People talk, Sloan. And right now, they're all talking about you. I said nothing. I wasn't about to play into whatever game he was setting up. You made an impression at Delacroix, Julian continued. And it seems you left with more than just experience. People are following you, Sloan. Important people. He wasn't wrong. And we both knew what was coming now. You're a smart woman, Julian said. You know where this is headed. I want you at Argentum. Full executive power. Build something with us. I closed my eyes for a moment. I had given Delacroix 6 years of loyalty, 6 years of brilliance, and Graham had thrown me away. No, he was about to watch me take everything he thought he owned. I exhaled. I'm listening. By the time the call ended, the deal was set. I wasn't just joining Argentum Holdings. I was leading a new initiative, one designed specifically to target Delacroix Global's market share. Graham had played me like a disposable piece on a chessboard. Now I was flipping the entire board. But before I struck, I needed to know exactly what was left of Delacroix. I reached for my phone and dialed Miles. He answered on the first ring. Tell me you've seen the resignations, I said. I have, he replied. And it's worse than you think. Talk to me. Graham's losing his grip. Investors are panicking. Clients are questioning whether the company can hold up. And with all these resignations, it's turning into a disaster. I smiled. Good. Miles hesitated. Sloan, what are you planning? I didn't answer right away, because this wasn't just business. It was personal. And I wasn't done yet. 2 days later, I sat in the boardroom of Argentum Holdings, overlooking the San Francisco skyline. Across from me sat a group of former DGS executives, people who had walked out after my firing. These weren't just employees. They were the architects of DGS's success. No, they were mine. I leaned forward, hands clasped. We're going to do this carefully. No mistakes. No rushed moves. The room was silent. Then the former head of marketing spoke. What's the plan? I looked around the table, meeting every gaze. Then I smiled. The plan is simple, I said. We dismantle Delacroix Global from the inside out. A heavy silence settled over the room, the kind that came before storms, the kind that couldn't be undone. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled, scanning the faces of those who had followed me here. Some were eager, fire burning behind their eyes. Others were wary. They understood the gravity of what we were about to do. I didn't blame them. We weren't just competing with Delacroix. We were tearing it apart, piece by piece, client by client, dollar by dollar. And by the time we were done, Graham Delacroix wouldn't have a company left to run. I let the silence stretch for another second. Then I said, we start slow. We don't attack head on. We let the cracks that are already forming do the work for us. Ethan Granger, the former head of finance, frowned. We already know Delacroix is in free fall, but they're not dead yet. Graham's gonna fight. I smiled. Of course he is. That's why we don't go for him directly. We go for the foundation, Miles said. Not. I met his eyes. Exactly. And now they had a choice to make. Stay with a sinking ship, or join the woman who had built it in the first place. By the next morning, my team had compiled a list of Delacroix Global's top 15 clients. I knew each one by name, not because I had memorized them for business reasons, but because I had built those relationships myself. I had spent years understanding their industries, anticipating their needs, and ensuring they trusted DGS with their money. Now I was about to take that trust with me. I scheduled 5 meetings over the next 3 days, all with long-standing clients who had already begun expressing concern about the chaos at DGS. I didn't have to convince them to leave. I just had to show them the truth about where things were headed. I arrived early for the first meeting, seated at the head of a sleek glass conference table inside Argentum's private executive suite. Across from me sat Caleb Stone, CEO of a high-profile tech firm and one of DGS's largest investors for the past 3 years. The look in his eyes told me everything. I already knew he was considering pulling out. Sloan, he said, his expression serious. I assume you know why I agreed to this meeting. I nodded, keeping my tone measured. Because you're worried. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. I invested in Delacroix because I trusted you, and now you're not there. That tells me I made a mistake. I leaned forward slightly. Then let me ask you something, Caleb. If I was never part of the picture, would you still trust Graham Delacroix to handle your investment? A beat of silence. Then he sighed. That's what I thought, I said softly. You don't have to stay with a company just because of history. What you need is stability. I paused. And I can give you that. His fingers drummed on the table. He was already convinced. He just needed the final push. Argentum is prepared to offer better terms, faster returns, and leadership you can rely on. I let that last line sink in, because that's what mattered most, wasn't it? Another beat of silence. Then Caleb nodded. The first domino had fallen. 2 days later, the news broke. Caleb Stone had officially moved all investments from Delacroix Global to Argentum Holdings, and Graham was spiraling. I knew it before anyone else did, because Miles messaged me. Miles, you've got his attention. He's scrambling. I smirked, typing back. Me, good, let him. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Graham wouldn't go down quietly. He never did. And I was right. That same afternoon, Tessa, my assistant, walked into my office, her expression tight. Graham Delacroix just called, she said, hesitating. He wants to meet with you. I didn't react. Not at first. I had expected this. Still, I took my time, setting down my pen and glancing up. Did he sound nervous? She nodded. Very. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Graham was losing control. And now, he wanted to talk. I glanced at the skyline, at the tower that still bore his name. The war had just begun, and I wasn't done yet. I met Graham at Orem Prime, the kind of high-end restaurant that only catered to people who believed they were invincible. He was already seated when I arrived, a drink in front of him. The moment he saw me, his jaw clenched. Good. He was feeling it. Sloane, he greeted, his tone forced. I wasn't sure you'd come. I slid into the seat across from him, taking my time. I was curious. He studied me, his expression unreadable. You're making a mistake. I tilted my head. Funny. I was about to say the same to you. His fingers curled around his glass. You don't have to do this. I let out a quiet laugh. Do what, Graham? Be successful. You already made it clear I wasn't welcome at Delacroix. I'm just doing what you taught me. His eyes darkened. You're trying to destroy me. I didn't respond right away. Then I leaned in, my voice dropping to a quiet, razor-sharp tone. I don't have to destroy you, Graham. You're doing it all on your own. His expression flickered, just for a second. Then he exhaled, letting the mask slip back into place. This isn't over. I smiled. No, I said. It's not. And with that, I stood and walked out, leaving him alone in the restaurant that once symbolized his power. Now, he was the one scrambling to stay afloat, and I was just getting started. As soon as I stepped outside, the night air wrapped around me crisp and cool. But even with the freshness of it, I could still feel the weight of the confrontation sitting heavy in my chest. Graham had been rattled. That alone should have felt like a victory. But something in the way he had looked at me, the way his voice had carried that final warning, "This isn't over," left me uneasy. If there was one thing I knew about Graham Delacroix, it was that he didn't take losing lightly. I pulled my phone from my bag and unlocked it. A new message had popped up on my screen. Miles, something's off. I think he's planning something. I stared at the words for a long moment, my gut twisting. I had expected pushback, resistance, maybe even smear campaigns. But this felt different. I typed back, "Me? What kind of something?" The reply came quickly. "Miles, I don't know yet. But whatever it is, be careful." I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around the phone. Graham wasn't just trying to keep his company afloat. He was planning his counterattack. The first sign of trouble came the next morning. I was sitting in my office at Argentum Holdings, reviewing the latest contracts from the clients we had pulled away from Delacroix Global Strategies, when Tessa knocked on my door. "Sloane?" she said, her voice unusually tense. "You need to see this." I glanced up. "What is it?" She hesitated before stepping forward and placing a stack of printed articles onto my desk. My stomach dropped the moment I saw the headlines. Sloan Mitchell faces allegations of corporate espionage. Argentum under fire. Did they steal trade secrets from Delacroix Global? I picked up one of the articles, scanning the word. According to inside sources, former Delacroix Global executive Sloan Mitchell has been accused of using confidential company information to manipulate and lure clients away from her former employer. I didn't need to read further. I knew exactly who the inside source was. Graham. That snake had gone to the press. I set the paper down slowly, my hands steady, though my blood was boiling beneath the surface. Tessa shifted uncomfortably. I already spoke to our legal team. We can issue a statement. No, I cut in, shaking my head. That's exactly what he wants. She frowned. What do you mean? I leaned back, exhaling sharply. If we rush to defend ourselves, we look guilty. Graham's testing us. He wants us to panic. Tessa nodded slowly, but I could still see concern flickering in her eyes. So, what do we do? I picked up my phone and dialed Miles. He answered on the first ring. I saw it, he said, before I could speak. Tell me, I said, my voice low. Did he plant anything inside Delacroix to make it look real? There was a pause, then a sigh. He's been keeping old, outdated files with your name still attached. Nothing actually illegal, but enough to create doubt. I clenched my jaw. So this wasn't just a PR hit. It was a carefully planted lie, wrapped in just enough truth to make people question me. Graham was good, but he had made one critical mistake. He had forgotten who he was up against. I spent the next few hours reading, watching, analyzing. The headlines were calculated, released in perfectly spaced intervals, spreading like wildfire. If I wasn't careful, this could spiral into something irreparable. But I had one advantage Graham didn't. I didn't need to lie to make my case. I pulled up an email, one that had been buried in my inbox for months. My resignation letter, a signed, time-stamped copy from weeks before my exit from Delacroix Global. Attached to it, a formal clearance document from Delacroix's legal department, confirmation that I had left clean. No files, no data, no theft. In other words, Graham's evidence was a complete fabrication. I called Tessa back into my office. Schedule a press conference, I said. Her eyes widened. You want to go public with this? I smiled. Absolutely. By evening, the press room at Argentum Holdings was packed. Reporters, cameras, microphones. I stepped up to the podium, my expression calm, unshaken. I could feel the weight of the accusations in the air, but I didn't let them touch me. Good evening, I began, my voice steady. I want to address the allegations made against me and Argentum Holdings. I reached into the folder beside me and held up the clearance document. This, I said, is proof that when I left Delacroix Global, I did so with complete transparency. Cameras flashed. I placed another document on the podium. And this, I said, is a copy of my official resignation letter, signed months before these accusations ever surfaced. A murmur rippled through the room. I let it settle before I delivered the final blow. The claims against me are not only false, they were strategically planted by an individual who stands to gain from my downfall. I looked directly into the cameras. Mr. Delacroix said clearly, if you have real evidence, bring it. I encourage you to come forward. I paused, my smile razor sharp. Because I know for a fact you don't have any. A silence stretched across the room. And just like that, the narrative flipped. The next morning, Graham said nothing. No official statements, no interviews, no press appearances. Because he couldn't. He had tried to trap me and instead, he walked right into mine. Tessa walked into my office with a grin. The internet is having a field day. I smirked. Good. I glanced at my phone. No new calls. No more smear attempts. For now, I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. But today, I had won. And I was ready for whatever came next. The silence from Graham was deafening. For 2 days, he hadn't responded. Not to the press, not to the public, and certainly not to me. I knew what that meant. He was trapped. If he spoke now, he'd have to show evidence that didn't exist. If he stayed silent, the world would see him for what he was, a coward, a liar, a desperate man clinging to the last scraps of his empire. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Anticipation, because this wasn't just about winning. This was about watching the fall, and I wasn't going to look away. I was sitting in my office when my phone buzzed again. I glanced down, expecting a message from Tessa or Miles. Instead, the name on the screen made my lips curl into a knowing smile. Caleb Stone, I answered smoothly. Caleb, to what do I owe the pleasure? There was a long pause. Then he sighed. I'm pulling out of Delacroix completely. I leaned back in my chair. And I'm moving the remainder of my investments to Argentum Holdings. I let the silence stretch between us, just long enough for the gravity to settle. Then I said, you made the right choice. A humorless chuckle echoed through the line. I should have done it sooner, Caleb said. I tapped my fingers lightly against the desk. What was the final push? There was a pause. Then his voice dropped lower. I just got word from a source inside Delacroix Global, he said, hesitating. It's worse than anyone knows. I straightened slightly. How bad? Bad enough that Graham won't be able to recover. My grip on the phone tightened. For months, I had known Delacroix Global was unraveling, but this was something else. Graham wasn't just losing, he was crumbling. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. The next morning, the headlines were brutal. Delacroix Global faces investor exodus. Stocks plunge overnight. Graham Delacroix under pressure as clients flee. Former executives speak out. The company is falling apart. I scrolled through the articles, sipping my coffee. My expression was impassive. This wasn't an attack from me. This was Graham's own doing. Every bad decision, every reckless move, every blind assumption that he could run a company without the people who had built it. It had finally caught up to him. Jonathan called before noon. I answered with a smirk already forming. Tell me, I said, how's the mood at Delacroix today? He exhaled sharply. You don't even want to know. Try me. There was a pause. Then his voice dropped low. The board is meeting. My smirk faded. Emergency? Yeah, he said quietly. And Graham wasn't invited. I sat up straight. Oh. The moment I had been waiting for had arrived sooner than expected. The board had finally realized what everyone else already knew. Graham Delacroix was a liability, and they were ready to cut him loose. By evening, the official announcement was everywhere. Graham Delacroix removed as CEO of Delacroix Global Strategies. It was over. Everything he had taken from me, everything he thought he could control, gone. I sat in my office, watching the live broadcast. The anchor's voice was smooth, measured, professional. In a shocking turn of events, the Delacroix Global Board of Directors has announced the immediate removal of CEO Graham Delacroix following a series of financial setbacks and the loss of major investor confidence. The decision follows months of internal conflict and declining performance metrics. The camera cut to a stock image of Graham, his once confident smirk frozen in time. But now there was no power behind it. No arrogance, no control because he had none left. I set my coffee down, exhaled slowly. I had thought this moment would feel like revenge, like victory. But in reality, it just felt like justice, because Graham had never truly been my enemy. He had always been his own. The phone rang late that night. I didn't need to check the screen. I already knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. Silence. Then the voice I knew so well. You won. I leaned back in my chair. I know. There was a long pause. Then Graham let out a slow, bitter laugh. You planned this from the start, didn't you? I smiled faintly. No, Graham. You did. He exhaled. And for the first time, there was no fight left in him. Nothing but defeat. Do you feel better? He asked quietly. I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly. I feel free. And with that, I ended the call. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a walk through the city. No meetings. No deadlines. No strategies running through my mind. Just me. For 6 years, I had fought for a company that was never truly mine. For 6 years, I had been a soldier in someone else's war. No more. Now, I was finally free. I reached a small cafe and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. I ordered a black coffee and waited by the window. As the barista handed me the cup, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't see a woman carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. I didn't see exhaustion or betrayal or bitterness. I saw Sloane Mitchell, and that was enough. Because the real power, it wasn't in revenge. It was in knowing when to walk away. This story isn't just about corporate betrayal. It's about resilience, strategy, and reclaiming your worth. Sloane Mitchell gave 6 loyal years to a company that used her brilliance, but discarded her for someone less qualified. But instead of crumbling, she rose, quietly, powerfully, and reminded the world that true leadership can't be replaced, and loyalty without respect is a trap. Her story teaches us that walking away isn't weakness, it's sometimes the most powerful move we can make. When someone underestimates you, don't fight for a seat at their table, build your own. And when the dust settles, let your success speak louder than their betrayal. If this story inspired you or reminded you of your own strength, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter about power, justice, and finding the courage to start over. Finally, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far these stories of resilience can travel.